Hello everyone and welcome to another video. Now in yesterday's one we took a look at the original Xbox One from 2013 and found that for a really cheap console experience it doesn't do too bad at all. There are certainly a lot of playable games out there if you don't mind 30 frames per second, and even if you want to experience some of the later cross-gen titles, games that also came to 9th generation consoles, PS5 and Xbox Series X/S, then it doesn't do completely horrifically, which is always a bonus. We tested Cyberpunk as part of yesterday's video and I want to expand on that a little bit more. We're actually running the game at its latest possible version here on the 8th gen consoles, 1.61. This never got the Phantom Liberty update or the 2.0 update. This is basically as updated as this game can get, but I have noticed that it runs a lot better than it used to, and I wanted to see how it compared to a super cheap PC in 2026. So on the OG Xbox One, we mentioned it yesterday, but this runs at 810p dynamically. It'll drop to 720p at its lowest, perhaps even lower. Maybe not as low these days because performance has been improved. Now we're exploring the Badlands here. This is pretty early on in the game. I've played about 10 minutes, customized the character and all that, and as we can see, I don't think it looks too bad. The aesthetic of Cyberpunk is still very much coming through here. It's a bit of a blurry presentation with a few flickering edges. I mean, if we look at the fence line here, yeah, all the pixels just sort of blur into one at points. There's also this weird flickering that occurs every so often. Now this has the original 5400 RPM hard drive inside it, so this is perhaps responsible for a few of the graphical problems, but I think we're also suffering from just a general hardware bottleneck here, especially in terms of the CPU. So you may notice a few texture popping issues, graphical anomalies, things like that. I think a lot of progress has been made in getting this running at its absolute best. The latest patch version is certainly the best way to experience Cyberpunk on these older gen consoles these days. Let's move into Night City now and see how things hold up. First of all though, I just want to talk briefly about the available graphics options. As we can see, we have film grain, chromatic aberration, depth of field, lens flare and motion blur. I've turned all these off by default. I'll show you how it looks with everything turned on. It's nice that we do have a few graphical options here. I turn them off as a personal preference because I just don't like how it looks. If you wish, you can choose from any and all of these. Now, as I said before, I think this still looks pretty good despite the low resolution. This is still very much Cyberpunk, and I still think it's one of the best looking 8th generation console games. Another thing worth mentioning is how rather dead Night City can feel. Just driving through the city here and you're going to notice a lack of NPCs and traffic compared to those newer versions. Oh, some road textures have failed to load. There we go, the road markings finally popped in at the end there. So let's get out and just cause some chaos on the streets if we can actually find anyone to cause trouble with. Oh, that'll do. It's very much a necessity to have. You see that, like the blood effects happened way after. That's something else you might find. Like there are some visual oddities, like you might fire a weapon and the bullets don't come out till like 2 seconds afterwards, and then when they do hit someone or something at the other end, that might take a couple of seconds as well. Sometimes you'll throw a grenade and it will just disappear and there'll be no explosion, which is really weird, or it'll be delayed, so you'll walk up to the car you threw a grenade at thinking, what happened to my grenade? And all of a sudden it'll explode and take you with it. I'm glad we have the weapon lock-on switched on too, because the lower frame rate can make things feel quite jarring and make aiming a little awkward. Like you'll try and aim your weapon precisely and it'll just feel a little messy. The NPCs as well just like to drive into you a lot in these older versions. Yeah, but so far, and it's not bad. Not as bad as I was anticipating. If you have a tolerance for 20 to 30 frames per second, you've been playing on console a lot of your life like I have, you're certainly going to be a lot more used to it, I think. But if you've experienced the newer versions of Cyberpunk and you're used to 60 frames per second or higher on newer consoles or PC, then it's going to be quite an adjustment to get used to, I have to say. Now here we have a quick frame rate test of Cyberpunk 2077 on the original Xbox One here. As we can see, we're fluctuating between 20 and 30 FPS most of the time, but looking back at some old footage of the game in its original form on the 8th generation consoles, and this is certainly an improvement from what I'm seeing. It still may not be considered playable to some, but it's certainly a lot better than it's ever been. And in my opinion, if you really wanted to play this, I said it yesterday or the other day, it's on Game Pass, so you could always give it a go, see if you're okay with how it runs, and if so, well, good. I then tried swapping to an SSD. Now I found this adapter for like £3 or £4 on Amazon, and we don't have to open up the Xbox One to use it. Now using a solid state drive should help alleviate some of the pop-in, and it should certainly help speed up the loading times. Just thought I'd show you how to use an SSD with the Xbox One if you don't want to open up the console. Buy the USB 3 or any USB 3 to SATA adapter, plug your solid state drive in one end, plug the other end into the Xbox, and then just follow the steps to format the drive. Once you plug it into your system, the Xbox should automatically detect it. It's going to ask you a couple of questions, and that's pretty much it. Now, of course, with an SSD, performance isn't going to be miraculously improved. The frame rate will pretty much be the same, but you might notice less pop-in, quicker texture loading, and improved loading times. Here's a brief snippet of gameplay, and as you can probably tell, the performance hasn't been impacted. Now, you may be wondering, what does it take to match this sort of performance or exceed it on a PC? Well, the good news is you don't really need anything too powerful. Of course, with Cyberpunk 2077 on PC, we do get access to the 2.0 update and beyond, meaning we can play Phantom Liberty. That's probably going to run a little bit worse. Now, I'm actually using a GTX 1650 here, a GDDR6 model of the card, and at 1080p with the low preset, which will keep a few things on medium by default, we are exceeding 40 FPS most of the time. In fact, hitting at least 30 at native resolution, so FSR switched off here, is not going to be a problem for this 4GB budget card. And I was quite surprised by this performance, in all honesty. The crowd density option is also set to low, but bear in mind for this footage we are using an i7-12700F, so perhaps it feels like cheating a little bit. Because of this, I thought we'd switch to a far more budget focused system, one that combines a now low-end CPU and GPU, just to see if we can at least retain a locked 30 FPS and therefore get a better performance experience than we can on the base Xbox One. So for this test, I combined a 4-core 8-thread i7-4790 from about 2014, as well as a GTX 970 and 16GB of 1600MHz dual channel RAM. Now the CPU and GPU are going to cost you well under £100 here in the UK, but of course we must factor in the rest of the system as well. That said, I am quite surprised by the performance here. Now I locked the game to 30 FPS using Riva Tuner because, to be honest, it wasn't really getting much more than that, but locking the frame rate to 30 means it feels a lot more consistent. And if you look at that frame time graph at the top left corner of your screen, you're going to see that it's basically flawless throughout this example gameplay here. It ran really well without any major hiccups at all, at least from my half-an-hour gameplay session, which means it's going to perform better than 2013's base Xbox One. That said, I still think it's a pretty impressive achievement that the base consoles, the base Xbox One, PS4, can run this game at all. And the fact that some more performance has been squeezed out of this game on those systems is quite miraculous, really. Of course, I wouldn't recommend building a 4790 and 970 rig in 2026 from scratch. I think the platform is too old, really, and it's going to struggle in a lot of modern games, but at the point of looking at it from a comparative perspective, I think it's interesting to see what sort of hardware we need to keep up with the base console and exceed the performance, in fact. But there we go. I wanted to take a more in-depth look at the base console performance of Cyberpunk 2077 in 2026 because it's still a very popular game and the Xbox One is the cheapest way to play it. Whether or not you'd consider it playable from what you've seen today is entirely up to you. It's going to depend on what your tolerance is for lower frame rates, but if you really want to play it, and this is your only option, I don't think it's insufferable by any means. But let me know what you think. Thanks as always for watching, and hopefully I'll see all of you in the next one.